It was a quiet Monday morning until a storm broke out across African Traoré. Namibian president to sign strategic energy spread like wildfire, flooding anonymous accounts and unverified political blogs. Hashtags like Bar Namibia vs Traore and Ya Traore betrayed quickly topped the trending charts. Western media remained conspicuously silent, and even African outlets hesitated to take a stance. But most telling of all, Namibia's suspicion was a major fracture unfolding within Africa's economic sovereignty movement. 3 days later in Dodoma, Tanzania, far from the public eye, a single leaked photo turned the narrative and Ibrahim Traoré shoulder to shoulder, shaking hands before a map of Africa. No press, no statements, just one image. Namibia had not betrayed Traoré. They were in fact preparing a revolutionary strategy of raw materials, especially uranium, processing alliance with Burkina Faso, and like-minded industry agenda, including oceanic resource management, cooperation in logistics, agriculture, and renewable energy, based on self-reliance, given a symbolic name, the Ubuntu Initiative. I am because we are. It was a declaration that Africa's true power lies in unity. 6 days later in Namibia's capital, Windhoek, the silence before the world, the Namibian president abandoned Traoré. We stand with him for one reason: Africa's future will not be revealed, earning immediate support from Mali, Guinea, Tanzania. Investigators exposed that the accounts behind the original rumors were in fact European bots, part of a failed attempt to sow division within Africa. Something strange happened on Monday morning. All over African social media, people were panicking. Namibia cuts ties with Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Namibia signs secret energy deal with France. It sounded crazy, but the hashtags were trending. The silence from Namibia even worse. No one said a word. No statement. No denial. Nothing. People began to wonder, had Traoré just been betrayed? Had one of Africa's closest allies turned on him? But hold on, the truth was something no one saw coming. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You believe that because this small nation can stand tall against global giants. If you believe that Africa deserves to write its own story in its own voice. If you've ever seen the fire in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes, then this story belongs to you. Subscribe to this channel, not just to support, but to stand together, together in a rising storm. As hashtags like Namibia vs Traore exploded online, the entire continent held its breath. Political analysts speculated betrayal. Western commentators nodded in silence. Traoré's supporters feared the worst. Was Namibia one of the last true allies about to cross the line? No press conference, no public denial, just silence. And in the digital age, silence screams. For 3 long days, Namibia's government said nothing, not a word. Captain Ibrahim Traoré also remained calm, too calm. Behind closed doors, suspicion festered. Was he blindsided? Was the Pan-African dream collapsing from within? The world waited hungry for a scandal. But beneath that silence, something much larger was brewing. Then it happened. A single photograph leaked from Dodoma, Tanzania. No journalists, no speeches, just Traoré and the Namibian president side by side, shaking hands beneath a map of Africa. Every rumor collapsed. Namibia hadn't betrayed him. They were preparing for something far more revolutionary, and doing it in silence. What they had built together was bold, ending raw exports of uranium and rare metals, launching an industrial alliance with Burkina Faso, building green economies rooted in self-reliance, logistics, farming, nuclear energy, all owned, processed, and managed by Africans. Its name, the Ubuntu Initiative. I am because we are, not a slogan, a strategy, a new way forward. Finally, in Windhoek, both leaders spoke. We didn't abandon Traoré. We stood with him because Africa's future won't be decided in Paris. Other nations joined: Mali, Guinea, Tanzania, South Africa. Then came the final twist. Investigators exposed that the fake rumors were seeded by European bot accounts. It wasn't just disinformation, it was sabotage. But it failed, and that's where through their feeds, a wave of confusion turned into a surge of outrage. Post after post accused Namibia of turning its back on Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the very leader who had become a symbol of deals with France. Traoré left out of key negotiations. But the noise was deafening. Even some Pan-African supporters began to question what was really happening. Was this the first crack in the United Africa? No press statement from Windhoek, no tweet, no interview. Meanwhile, Western media, and that silence, usually quick to comment, said nothing. It was almost as if they were waiting for the narrative to play out on its own. Some called it a diplomatic earthquake. Fear was real. Others whispered if a nation like Namibia, so closely aligned with Traoré, could flip overnight, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, then who wasn't just fighting imperialism. He might be facing a betrayal from within his own continent. But what followed was even Namibia said absolutely nothing. No official rebuttal, no press briefing, not even a vague denial. Windhoek, usually diplomatic and precise, had gone silent. And that silence was louder than any were left in the dark. Across WhatsApp groups and Telegram channels, theories spiraled. Had Traoré been isolated? Was he blindsided by a so-called partner? Or worse, was Namibia Burkina under pressure? Officials refused to comment. Traoré himself made no statement, no speech, no reaction. And for a man known for his directness into every little detail, a cancelled trade meeting, a delayed flight, a missing flag at a summit, whispers everything more dangerous. Suspicious. Whispers that this wasn't just diplomacy gone wrong. This was the beginning of a continental betrayal, orchestrated quietly and deliberately. Still, Traoré said nothing. In the outside world, it looked like he was losing ground. But those who knew Captain Ibrahim Traoré well understood something else when he says nothing. It usually means he's already 10 steps ahead. Then just as the anxiety peaked, no media conference. Just a single image leaked from Dodoma, Tanzania. It spread across the continent like wildfire. Two men stood side by side, calm, focused. One was the president of Namibia. The other unmistakably was Captain Ibrahim. Not the smile of formality, but of shared purpose. Behind them, a large map of Africa filled the wall. No flags, no staged podium, just unity raw and unfiltered. In a matter of seconds, everything changed. Collapsed like a house of cards. There had been no betrayal, no deal with France, no diplomatic breakdown. What there had been was strategy. Careful, quiet, calculated. What no press conference ever could. Traore and Namibia were still looking for signs of collapse. But they had missed the bigger story, one that was never meant to be public. Wasn't defending himself. He was building something, and now it was too late for his enemies to stop it. It had been power in disguise. And finally the truth came to light, not through speeches, Traoré and Namibia were preparing, was far more powerful than any rumor. It was a blueprint for a new Africa, a silent revolution. Together they were working on a plan to end the export of raw materials, especially uranium and rare earth metals, long exploited by foreign powers. They weren't stopping there. They were forming a strategic alliance with Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, and others to build processing plants, green industry hubs, and logistics corridors run by Africans called the Ubuntu Initiative, meaning, I am because we are, a phrase, a philosophy, civilian nuclear energy, ocean resource management, and agricultural independence. No foreign loans, no IMF strings, just sovereignty designed beyond rhetoric. But this wasn't talk. It was a full-scale economic weakness. Captain Ibrahim Traoré was building strength quietly, methodically, with allies who understood that unity wasn't a slogan. It was survival. And when the silence finally broke, rumors first exploded, the world's cameras turned towards Windhoek, Namibia. A joint press conference had been called. The flags of both nations stood side by side. The room was packed. Journalists were tense. The questions were sharp. But the message was even sharper. The Namibian president didn't waste Captain Ibrahim Traoré. We are walking with him because Africa's future cannot and will not be decided in Paris. The room fell quiet. This wasn't just a defense. It was a declaration of war, not with weapons, composed but fierce. Then came the full reveal of the Ubuntu Initiative, step by step, goal by goal. No vague promises, no fluffy speeches, just numbers, timelines, agreements, infrastructure plans, resource-sharing protocols, everything the continent had waited decades to hear. Then came the shockwave. Other nations once cautious began stepping forward. Mali, Guinea, Tanzania, South Africa. One after another, they pledged support, not just with words, but with policy, with land, with investment. Just Traoré's plan. It was Africa's began. Another twist emerged, darker and more that the original rumors, the ones that set the internet ablaze, had not come from Namibia. They didn't even come from Africa. They were traced back to bot networks originating in Europe. Thousands of fake accounts, coordinated, timed, designed to create chaos and division. A quiet attack on unity because the truth was stronger. Because Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't rush to fight lies with louder lies. He waited, he prepared, and when he struck back, he did it. One of the youngest leaders in modern African history dismantled a foreign disinformation campaign, not with censorship, not with arrests, but with clarity, strategy, and a vision too big to silence. It was about every African nation that had ever been divided, weakened, or manipulated by voices outside their borders. In that moment, the message was not asleep. It was awake, wide awake. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood on that stage. He didn't speak like a man defending himself, like a man who had already won. For once had no choice but to listen. In the end, it wasn't just a story truth can be buried, and how powerfully betrayal had grown into trending hashtags, seeded doubt, and shaken the confidence of an entire continent. All it took were a few fake headlines, a wave of silence, and the perfect calm response of Captain Ibrahim Traoré was something rarely seen in modern politics. Strategic. He didn't blame. Instead, he didn't play into the hysteria. He watched. He let the storm pass, and when the moment was right, he delivered the truth with press release or a denial. It was a movement, a vision, a continent choosing to write its own story. Never about Namibia or France, it was about or even deeper, the centuries-old struggle over who gets the continent has been told what it is: poor, divided, dependent. Its leaders have been labeled either puppets or rebels, rarely architects of their own future. But in Traoré's silence, and then in his clarity, something changed. He dismantled an entire pattern of interference, of manufactured discord, of subtle manipulation masked as diplomacy. And perhaps that's what scared so many. If a young leader like Captain Ibrahim Traoré could withstand the full weight of a global disinformation campaign and turn it into a unifying call, what happens when 10 more leaders, an entire generation stops reacting into initiative represents? It's not just policy, it's identity. It's the quiet understanding that sovereignty isn't gifted, it's built. That silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the sound of planning. The noise failed. Because at the center of it all was a man who refused to let others speak for him, who looked past the headlines and trusted in something older than the internet, the dignity of a people who remember who they are. But this time, it's not fueled by lies. It's fueled by truth. So, if you believe the lie, you weren't alone. But now that you've seen the truth, you're part of something bigger. Share, subscribe, not for clicks, but to carry the message forward is awake. And Captain Ibrahim Traoré just reminded the world, silence isn't surrender. Rooted in truth, cannot be stopped. If you believe that even a small nation can still stand tall against global giants, if you believe that Africa has the right to tell its own story in its own voice on its own terms, if you've seen the fire in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes and felt something stir within you, like this video, then this story, subscribe to this channel, not just to show support, but to walk this road together. Because what we are witnessing is not politics. It's a storm that started as whispers, but is now shaking thrones in silence. The age of silence is over. Africa is not waiting to be saved. It is rising, led by those who still dare to believe. And you're not just watching history, you're part of it now. In an age where information moves faster than truth, and silence is often mistaken for weakness, the story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré and Namibia offers a powerful and timely lesson, not only for Africa, but for every nation and citizen who dares to storms do with a rumor, a digital spark, a few posts on anonymous platforms claiming that Namibia had turned its back on Captain Traoré, that it was striking a secret deal with France, that a rift had formed in what many hoped was a new Pan-African front. The headlines were sharp, the hashtags trended, and for a moment it felt like something sacred was beginning to unravel. It wasn't just a defense against fake news, it was a masterclass in strategic leadership, the kind that doesn't rush to react but waits to move with purpose. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not issue panic tweets or hold angry press conferences. He didn't fight noise with more noise. Instead, he let the silence speak, and in doing so reminded the world that true leadership is not about volume. This silence was not inaction, it was preparation. Also stayed silent. And in that mutual stillness, many feared the worst. But fear, as this story proved, is often a mirror. It reflects our own insecurities more than reality. What was really happening in the background was not betrayal, but bold cooperation. A vision was being shaped, not in public forums or televised summits, but in private rooms behind closed doors, among leaders who understood that real transformation requires patience. Was the turning point. It didn't need a caption, 2 leaders, 1 handshake, a map of Africa behind them. It was quiet, intentional, and revolutionary. In that image, we learn that sometimes the most powerful way to fight disinformation is not to argue, but to show a deeper truth. The truth of unity was even more important, of vision. The unveiling of the Ubuntu Initiative, a continental strategy to break free from raw material dependency, to process wealth within Africa, to lead in green energy and civil nuclear power, to reclaim control over logistics, agriculture, and technological infrastructure. These were not abstract dreams. They were plans mapped out, signed, structured. It was Africa daring to say we will no longer be exploited for what lies beneath our soil, but empowered by what we choose. Traced to bot networks from Europe gave the story its final twist. It confirmed what many suspected, that the greatest threats to African unity do not always come with tanks or treaties. Sometimes they come as tweets. They arrive as fake headlines designed to divide, to create panic, to fracture trust. But this time it didn't work. This time truth had a strategy. Ultimately is the core lesson in the modern world. Truth must be defended not just with facts, but with foresight, with structure, with vision. Captain Ibrahim Traoré taught us that you don't need to shout to be heard. You need to stand where others fall and speak. In the emotional reaction of the public, the rush to outrage, the readiness to believe the worst. These are human responses, but they are also vulnerabilities. We must train ourselves as citizens to pause before we share, to think before we assume, because every repost, every click is part of a greater system, one that can either build nations or tear them apart. The weaponization of misinformation is real. This story also reminded us it thrives that Africa is no longer a passive player in global affairs. The days of waiting for permission, for foreign aid, for international approval, those days are being replaced by something deeper. A quiet confidence, a grounded self-belief, one that does not need to explain itself to the West, but instead acts according to the needs of its people. Of other African nations stepping up to support the Ubuntu Initiative shows the ripple effect of principled leadership. Mali, Guinea, Tanzania, South Africa. They saw something in Traoré's approach worth following, not because it was loud, not because it was defiant, but because it was real. We see the birth of a new kind of hero, not the warrior with raised fists, but the strategist who plants seeds, who builds slowly, who trusts the power of collective movement over individual noise. We must remember this moment not as a victory over rumors, but as a blueprint for future resilience. Because the attacks will return, the disinformation will evolve, the pressure will come again from different angles, wearing new disguises. But if Africa remembers what happened here, if we remember how silence became strength, how truth became a strategy, and how a storm was calmed, not by panic, but by planning, Ibrahim Traoré's story in this crisis isn't just an African story. It is a human story about dignity, intelligence, and the power of stillness in a world addicted to noise. As I watched the story unfold, I felt something shift inside me. At first, like many others, I believed the noise. The hashtags were everywhere. Namibia vs. Traore. Traoré betrayed, and the silence was terrifying. It felt like the hope we'd placed in African unity was beginning to crack. And in that moment, I felt vulnerable. I felt betrayed. But more than anything, I felt afraid that we had just witnessed the beginning of the end for Captain Ibrahim. Piece by piece was something far greater than I expected. It was not just a tale of rumors and truth. It was a lesson in how a leader should lead. In a world where so many politicians rush to defend themselves, with rage, spin, and distractions, Captain Traoré chose silence. His silence was strategic, not out of weakness, but out of strength. Calculated, wise. And I realized how unaccustomed we are to that kind of leadership. We're so used to noise, conflict, and drama that when someone chooses stillness, we mistake it for surrender. But it wasn't. It was a form of discipline, the kind that only leaders with vision truly possess. That one image of Traoré and the Namibian president standing together, smiling with a map of Africa behind them, I was stunned. All of the outrage, the fear, the accusations, reduced to nothing with a single handshake. It wasn't just that suddenly I hadn't betrayed Traoré. It was that they had never intended to play that game to begin with. They were playing a different game, one the rest of the world wasn't ready for. Not because I didn't think Africa was capable of such bold planning. I've always believed in the power of the continent, but because it was so meticulously prepared, so forward-thinking, so unapologetically African. This wasn't just policy, exports. It was purpose. Building green energy from within, owning logistics, processing our own wealth. I couldn't stop thinking, this is what we've waited for. This is the blueprint for what comes after colonialism. This is what they've always tried to stop Africa from doing. And the bots, the fake accounts, the European part of me wasn't surprised. We know how power works. We know how narratives are controlled. But what amazed me was how Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't fall into the trap. He didn't lash out. He didn't call for revenge. He simply stood tall, revealed the truth, and powerful about a man who doesn't need to shout to be heard, who doesn't need to fight every insult because he knows who he is and what he stands for. That kind of confidence is rare, as a viewer, and it's exactly what continent I feel inspired. I feel challenged. I feel called to be more than just a consumer of headlines. I feel a responsibility to think deeper, to question louder, to support leaders who lead with integrity of ourselves in this story. We saw our fears, our hopes, our doubts, but more importantly, we saw what it looks like when truth is handled with care. When leadership isn't about being first to speak, but about being reminded me of the elders we used to look up to, those who spoke with calm voices but carried the weight of wisdom. He reminded me of what leadership used to mean and what it could mean again. Not performance, not ego, something about myself, but responsibility, about how quickly I was ready to believe the worst, about how easy it is to fall for division even when you believe in unity. It made me question my own habits, the way I scroll, the way I share, the way I speak about leaders, without the change won't come from the top alone. It will come when ordinary people like me, start to think more critically, when we stop feeding the fires of disinformation, when we choose to listen, to wait, to question, and I hope more people see it. Because it's not just about Captain Traoré. It's about a moment, a turning point. Even in the face of chaos, there are leaders who will choose strategy over spectacle and substance. Watching this, thinking about this, then you're part of that story we witnessed. It's a future we're building together. Conflict and drama, that when someone chooses stillness, we mistake it for surrender. But it wasn't. It was a form of discipline, the kind that only leaders with vision truly possess. That one image of Traoré and the Namibian president standing together, smiling with a map of Africa behind them, I was stunned. All of the outrage, the fear, the accusations, reduced to nothing with a single handshake. It wasn't just that and suddenly I hadn't betrayed Traoré. It was that they had never intended to play that game to begin with. They were playing a different game, one the rest of the world wasn't ready for. Not because I didn't think Africa was capable of such bold planning. I've always believed in the power of the continent, but because it was so meticulously prepared, so forward-thinking, so unapologetically African. This wasn't just policy, exports. It was purpose. Building green energy from within, owning logistics, processing our own wealth. I couldn't stop thinking, this is what we've waited for. This is the blueprint for what comes after colonialism. This is what they've always tried to stop Africa from doing. And the bots, the fake accounts, the European part of me wasn't surprised. We know how power works. We know how narratives are controlled. But what amazed me was how Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't fall into the trap. He didn't lash out. He didn't call for revenge. He simply stood tall, revealed the truth, and powerful about a man who doesn't need to shout to be heard, who doesn't need to fight every insult because he knows who he is and what he stands for. That kind of confidence is rare,
As a viewer,
and
as
it's
a citizen
exactly
of
what
this continent,
continent I feel inspired. I feel challenged. I feel called to be more than just a consumer of headlines. I feel a responsibility to think deeper, to question louder, to support leaders who lead with integrity, reflection of ourselves in this story. We saw our fears, our hopes, our doubts, but more importantly, we saw what it looks like when truth is handled with care. When leadership isn't about being first to speak, but about being reminded me of the elders we used to look up to, those who spoke with calm voices but carried the weight of wisdom. He reminded me of what leadership used to mean and what it could mean again. Not performance, not ego, something about myself, but responsibility, about how quickly I was ready to believe the worst, about how easy it is to fall for division even when you believe in unity. It made me question my own habits. The way I scroll, the way I share, the way I speak about leaders, without the change won't come from the top alone. It will come when ordinary people like me, start to think more critically, when we stop feeding the fires of disinformation, when we choose to listen, to wait, to question, and I hope more people see it, because it's not just about Captain Traoré. It's about a moment, a turning point. Even in the face of chaos, revolution, there are leaders who will choose strategy over spectacle and substance, watching over soundbites. Thinking about this, then you're part of that story we witnessed. It's a future we're building together.